Like the name says, Urban Presence is all about the presence of Christians in urban areas, specifically deprived and outer estates. It was set up in response to what we saw as an imbalance that created two needs: to resource Christians and churches living and working in those areas, and to recognise those areas within the wider church as mission fields, not overseas, but on our doorsteps.
What motivated me is God transformed me. It's exciting to see what He can do. I grew up on a Birmingham Overspill estate in an unchurched family. My dad and brothers were factory workers. One brother was in a rock group and the other brother raced around with bikers. My mother was told I would never pass an exam in my life. So God can transform anyone.
I grew up on a suburban estate near Belfast and came to Manchester in the late 70s and stayed. My wife and I felt a clear call to move into the inner city community where we still are 30 odd years later. We are residents and neighbours who also happen to be Christians. This is home.
Part of my inspiration has been, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things, the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before Him. That's 1 Corinthians 1. This gives the confidence that as He chose a person of no consequence like me, He still chooses the unlikely. It's exciting serving God. What a privilege, facing the challenge and being stretched and seeing God work.
The last 25 years have seen a number of big changes in our city. One has been the growth of minority ethnic groups, with many new people arriving, mostly settling in the inner city. This adds a multicultural dimension that is both enriching and a challenge to our hospitality. Another has been the huge growth of city centre dwelling. This is a very different type of urban. Predominantly young, upwardly mobile professionals who choose to move into this part of the city. We acknowledge there is a need to reach them with the gospel, but our concern remains with those living in the ring of inner estates between the city centre and the suburbs. The places which are consistently and stubbornly in the bottom 10% of deprivation statistics, despite growth of wealth elsewhere, and where those who can move out do just that.
The context is challenging. The incidence of Christians living in inner city communities is less. There's more social need, there's more crime, there's less resources. We are a divided nation. Brexit hasn't caused it, it has only exposed it. We're well aware of the reality that there are two nations. Novelists such as George Eliot, Thomas Hardy, Charles Kingsley, Elizabeth Gaskell, Benjamin Disraeli and Charles Dickens all wrote about this other nation years ago. And we are facing the same challenge today. Ken Loach in I, Daniel Blake makes the same case.
These are the areas we as individuals have felt a call of God to live, and where the Christians and churches are that Urban Presence has sought to serve.
Unfortunately, we find the church seems to reflect society in failing to take adequate responsibility. The plight of the poor and marginalised in our inner city communities is the responsibility of the whole church. John Stott gave expression to this way back in 1974 in the Lausanne Covenant. Evangelisation requires the whole church to take the whole gospel to the whole world. The church in our nation is responsible for our marginalised in inner city communities, reaching out not only to the marginalised British, the shrinking working class and the growing left behind or underclass. These constitute an unreached group, a people group among which there is no indigenous community of believing Christians with adequate numbers and resources to evangelise this people group without outside cross-cultural assistance. Not to mention the multiplicity of nations in the same geographical context.
The working class feels alienated and commodified. The left behind are largely disengaged and suspicious. The ethnic minorities feel threatened and insecure. There is a big need for relationship and well-being, a need for shalom and the awareness of the love of God. What if, as Christians, we didn't have to start lots of projects and programs to connect with and help the deprived and marginalised, but find that we're helping them simply because they're our neighbours? What if people didn't only encounter Christians on a Sunday morning service when we're putting on a good front, if that is, they come through our doors? What if they could also meet and interact with us through the rest of the week, in the neighbourhood, on the street, in the shops, the local school, at the bus stop?
It's rewarding, serving, facing the challenge, being stretched and seeing God work. We've engaged in research, taught academic courses, ran training courses, resourced urban ministry practitioners, churches and organisations, wrote articles and books, lobbied organisations regarding urban concerns.
We have advocated for our communities with local councillors, MPs, media and charities and businesses big and small. We have also worked alongside others on issues of shared concern, using elements of community organising. For example, helping set up and run a community organisation called Charisma with its Peace Week as a grassroots response to gun crime. Street Pastors began as another response to that same issue, and we were instrumental in that coming to Manchester.
More importantly, we've engaged in urban ministry ourselves and raised our families in these contexts.
All from being long-term residents and neighbours in inner city communities, what I've called mission with, and being members of local churches. A lot has been achieved and there's so much to be positive about. The many amazing people we've got to know, learned from, shared with, encouraged, prompted, seen grow in their confidence and well-being, and sometimes Christian faith.
Some of the principles I considered vital are a clear sense of call, incarnational living, community engagement, longevity and spiritual empowerment. Without a clear sense of call, you could just go out on a whim. But I can't understand why so many Christians get a call to the suburbs. Incarnational living. These communities cannot be reached remotely. We need to be seen and feel what they feel. Community engagement. You won't be trusted if you don't work with others. It takes time, sometimes your whole life. And spiritual empowerment. Without the Holy Spirit, there is no divine dynamic.
We've been encouraged by many positives within the wider church, including a number of initiatives to encourage Christian mission and ministry in the inner city. Eden, Urban Expression, Antioch Network, to name just a few. Many lives have been changed by the power of the gospel. However, the imbalance behind those needs for resourcing and recognition remains. When Urban Presence began, we noted that 75% of people lived in the inner city or outer estate areas, and 25% lived in the suburban areas, a figure that was reversed when it came to where Christians lived. Our point was, and still is, if all Christians, to use a popular phrase, have been placed by God where they are, given their proportion in the inner city, that imbalance would suggest that God is not that concerned with reaching people in those areas. The underlying cause of that imbalance has still largely not been recognised and challenged. The church is mostly middle class, and its discipleship of believers has been compromised by middle class values. This causes problems for mission among non-middle class people. Many Christians are not hearing the call of God to move in. Christians already in the inner city often move out. Where Christians live is largely missing from our discipleship. Our research and experience over many years clearly shows that one of the biggest life choices is not being addressed in our churches.
In my teens, I was a keen athlete, just getting to county level, running the 100, 220 and 440 yards and the 4x110 yards relay. I ran the last leg. Now, having carried a different baton, we need to pass it on to those who will take it to the next level in being champions of the urban concerns.